You're listening to the Balanced Educator Podcast, episode number 73. Welcome to the Balanced Educator. We're your hosts, Kaylee
and Josiane from Educalme. Our intention is to equip and empower you to feel more calm, balanced, and joyful in all aspects of your life.
Hello there and welcome. As teachers, we want to see our students succeed academically, but it can often feel like social emotional problems, social emotional learning seems to get in the way or interfere with all the academic teaching and learning that we want to take place in our classrooms. We've invited Jen Kreitz to the show today to talk about how that social emotional learning actually improves and supports the academic learning, and specifically how mindfulness prepares the brain for learning. Jen is a resource teacher with a passion for mental and physical health and wellness. It was through a recently completed Master's of Education, specifically in special education program, that Jen learned about the significance of the mind-body-brain connection in teaching and in learning. She now infuses mindfulness practices into daily lessons with her students at work and in her own personal practices at home. Before we get into the interview, we just want to take a second to say we appreciate you so much. Thank you for being here. For those that keep coming back every week, welcome. We are so grateful to have you as a part of our community. And for those that are new to the show, welcome. We're happy to have you. And we invite you to subscribe to the show so that you get our episodes when they come out every week. So before you put your phone away, hit that subscribe button so that we can connect with you again on Monday. All right, let's get into this interview with teacher and one of our awesome Educalme ambassadors, Jen Kreitz. Hello there, Jen, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Kaylee. Thanks for having me.
We are so excited to have you back. We had you on the show already once in episode 55, and you shared such awesome tidbits, ways for us to practice mindfulness in our classrooms. And we're so excited to have you back to get even deeper on the subject of mindfulness and really go deeper into what's happening in the brain for our students. So before we get started, can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself in case they didn't hear your first episode with us?
Yeah, sure. I am a teacher in Winnipeg. I work at a K-4 school. I am fairly new to the resource department. It's my second year as a resource teacher, but up until now, I've been an early years teacher, mainly in grade 2, but I've kind of taught everything from K to grade 6.
That's awesome. So you've done your master's. Can you tell us a little bit about what you studied during your program?
Yeah, I started really investigating literacy and, how to support struggling readers. I was a reading recovery teacher for 5 years, so that was sort of where the kind of interest in literacy began, because these little guys go through intensive programs and some of them just aren't as successful as others. So I wanted to figure out what was getting in the way. And for a lot of these guys, it comes back to the brain just not being ready to learn. And, the effects of mental health and home situations and poverty and just different life experiences that these children have had. And what I found was that mindfulness was a tool that teachers could use to help these students become more settled, more calm, and actually help their brains become ready to learn. So my studies kind of shifted over to learning more about mindfulness and the mental health aspect, and kind of still incorporated literacy, but really ended up focusing on mindfulness.
That's so interesting. I think that's something that I noticed in my career in education, and I think a lot of teachers go through that same sort of trajectory where you start out being like, okay, I'm teaching the academics, and I want to reach all of my learners, but there's something in the way. So what can I do to get everyone to the same place? What is stopping them? And it seems that it's coming back to that social emotional development, that baseline where we need to serve our students and reach their needs socially and emotionally before they seem to be ready to learn. So you talked about the brain being ready to learn. What does that mean? Like when they're coming in and their brain isn't ready to learn yet?
Yeah, so yeah, it goes back to the social emotional aspect of it too, where if you're in a heightened state, whether it's, that you're physically revved up, you're emotionally revved up, or the opposite, where you're just so down low, your brain is different parts of your brain work in different ways. So being able to activate those brains that promote learning will really help. So some children will need to be kind of woken up and get those areas of their brain firing on all cylinders. And some, and this is what we tend to see most often, are the ones that are really the high flyers, the ones that come in and they're yelling and they're shouting and they're running around the room. And we have to get them kind of brought down a little bit to help them learn. So the different parts of your brain have different responsibilities. And if your amygdala, which is sort of like the part of your brain that is the warning center, is firing all the time, then your brain physically cannot take in any information because it's so busy protecting you that it says, whoa, 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 I just got to make sure you're safe. We can't learn anything right now. But when your prefrontal cortex kind of takes over and goes, wait a second, you're really not in danger. That's just a ball coming at you. It's not a bear. Then, let's take a minute. And then you can kind of reason through it a little bit better and help our students reason through it too. And then they're in a better state to learn.
Right. So it's about getting that prefrontal cortex involved to tell the amygdala, like, everything's okay. We're all going to be okay.
Yeah, exactly.
You are safe, and therefore it is an okay time to learn new things and devote your resources to learning new things.
Right. Yeah. Our brains are actually pretty prehistoric. The rest of us has kind of evolved into different things. Like we can, drive and listen to music and sing a song. And, if you're a parent, you can pass the cup to the kid in the back kind of thing. But our brains themselves are still pretty old. So the amygdala doesn't know if it's TV that's setting us off, if it's something real, if it's something imagined. It just knows that there's a threat. So we need to work on that amygdala, or the prefrontal cortex, to work with the amygdala and say, you know what, I'm just watching a scary movie. Or this is a video game, or it's a scary part of a book that I'm reading. And sometimes kids especially really need to be walked through that process. And that's where something like, mindfulness can help, because through mindfulness and the practice of it, we can teach the prefrontal cortex and all the different parts of our brain how to get into a place where we can remain calm and we can say, you know what, that's really not a threat. And then kind of move on to the next thing.
That makes so much sense. So mindfulness as a tool to get the brain ready to learn. Is there any information on how often this has to be done, or for how long it has to be done to really get their brains from that fight and flight state and into the state where they're calm, in the rest and restore, and ready to learn?
I don't have like specific, you have to do it for 10 minutes every, 3 hours kind of thing. But it's definitely a case of the more you practice, the better it is. It's kind of like they say doing a bicep curl. The more you do bicep curls, the more you strengthen those muscles, and the stronger they'll be. It's the same thing with mindfulness. Instead of working a muscle, you're actually building synaptic connections in your brain. So the more often you practice that and the more often you do it, the stronger that synaptic connection will be in the brain. So if you do it, practice maybe once a week, over time, yeah, it'll build, the connection will be stronger. But if you practice every day, if you practice a few times a day, you're building that connection in your brain. And so it'll be there sooner when you really need it.
That makes so much sense. It's just like anything that we're trying to learn, right? When we're learning how to read, when we're learning our colors, whatever, when we're learning to walk, the more we practice, the easier it gets. So that makes total sense that the more you're practicing mindfulness, the easier it's going to be for that child to be able to recognize when they are elevated and know what to do to get back to being in that state where they're ready to learn.
Right.
So you focused a lot on, or your interest was in looking at those students that were having more troubles than others. And you found that mindfulness was something that just kept coming back up in your research. I think for a lot of teachers, that's really something that's on their mind. In my classroom, I have a number of students that really need more support than others. So should we be doing mindfulness more with those students, or is this something that we do as a whole class? What do you think is the best way to use this as a tool to support those struggling learners?
Yeah, it's definitely something that every child and every adult can benefit from. I would suggest starting it when the kids are calm, when they don't actually need it. And so they can have some success with it. So, making it part of the daily schedule, finding a part of the day where you just take a moment to breathe and connect with, how am I feeling right now? And if the kids can say, you know what, I'm feeling pretty good. I just, played with my friend at recess and they're thinking the happy thoughts. Then that also strengthen those happy thoughts when they're practicing, so that when they do need it, they're able to kind of pull it out of their toolbox. Now, of course, there are some kids who are going to need it more often, whether they have anxiety, whether they have, their engines run high, they are the more active kids. Maybe there's something going on at home and they just need that quiet time. It's always good to make it part of your daily regular practice with the entire group, but then also let the kids who need that extra practice have that time.
Yeah. We often have teachers asking us, I have this student, and usually it's a student that is a struggling learner, or, they're really working on acceptable behaviors and acting in a way that's acceptable in the classroom. And often teachers will think, you know what, I don't think that kid's going to be able to do it. Or their question is, how do I get them to do it? There's no way that they're going to want to do this because they have all that energy, and it's hard to visualize, what am I going to do to get them to actually sit still and do this practice? What would you suggest to those teachers that are wondering, like, how am I going to make this happen?
Yeah, that can be a big challenge. I would suggest doing some movement with the mindfulness. So, really, mindfulness is really just about being present, right? And realizing how you're feeling, how your body is feeling, how your brain is feeling, how you're feeling inside. And so for kids especially, if you can incorporate some movement into that, especially those ones that really are very active, that can really help them expend some of that energy in a positive way, and then also help them connect with their breath. So for the teachers who are kind of pulling their hair out, how can I get this little guy to sit down and to breathe? Well, just start with some movement, and then slowly, as they're ready, move into just being able to do the breathing.
Mm-hmm. And why is it important, especially for these struggling learners, to really stick to it. You know, it can get frustrating and feel like, you know what, this isn't working. You know, what can you say to a teacher that's thinking maybe it's not worth trying to do this?
Don't give up
Yeah.
is what I would recommend. The short of it, it's not a quick and easy fix. It is something that does need to be practiced. And if chances are, if a child is a struggling learner, they will need more repetition with anything they do, whether it is breathing or, you know, reading or learning math. That's just how their brain works. So understanding that that's how they're built, and just keep trying, just keep working at it until you know, you do see some success.
Right. And you know, the interesting thing is the kids that we want to give this tool to the most are generally often the ones that visibly to us have more difficulty regulating their own emotions, that self-regulation piece. Can you talk a little bit about how mindfulness and self-regulation go together, and maybe even go a little bit into like, what is self-regulation really?
Well, I learned about self-regulation through Stuart Shanker's books, and you know, like with Stuart Shanker's model, there are different domains. So there's like the social domain where, you know, some kids can be really successful, except they kind of fall apart socially, or maybe they have some sensory issues. So like the physical part of it, you know, if a tag is bothering them. But if everyone's body kind of works in different ways and everyone has different thresholds. So some people could take an itchy woolly sweater all day long and it wouldn't bother them. But some, they just touch it before they even put it on. They go, no way, like I can't. So it's understanding that so self-regulation is all about finding that like happy balance, right? Just being very calm and being able to learn and function in the world. If the regulation is off, then you're going to see the dysregulated child. So the ones that are running around the room, the ones that are yelling, or the ones that are hiding in a corner just because there's way too much stimulation. So self-regulation is an important thing for teachers to understand because we see everything, right? We see both ends of that spectrum. But where mindfulness can come into it is that if we practice with our students and help them to understand that, okay, I'm sitting here and I notice that there's something in my shoe. And maybe it's just one little grain of sand, but it's enough to really set that child off. So they can, you know, if they finally settle, they can say there's something in my shoe. And then, you know, it can help the little child take the sand out, or they could dump it out themselves. But it's mindfulness is all about, you know, feeling what's happening in your body, which is what regulation is about. So are you feeling okay? Is there something bothering you? And how can we use those two things together to help everyone, you know, come to a calm and balanced state?
Right. Yeah, that's really helpful. So as we're teaching mindfulness, it's, you know, eventually going to help our students to recognize how they're feeling and then have the tools to be able to regulate those emotions independently is really the goal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So I'd love to know, really kind of a broad question, but from your research, like, how does mindfulness help learning? Because really that is our goal as teachers, is we want to be teaching our students. We want to see them progressing academically. In terms of the research, what is the research telling us about mindfulness and learning?
Well, the thing about mindfulness and other research is that it's still a pretty new area. And a lot of the research that has been done has been with adults. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit, at this point, it's still a little bit tricky to see exactly the effects that it has. But I did read a couple studies where there was a teacher who in Ontario who taught mindfulness to her class, and she found benefits with self-regulation. So, children being able to regulate their emotions and their bodies on their own versus co-regulation, where the teacher was stepping in to help them. But she also found that there were benefits with executive functioning. So, with learning, you have to be able to, in order to be really successful, you have to be able to carry out a plan and see it through, or make a plan and see it through, which is what executive functioning is all about. So, that's another area where this one particular study found there's a benefit to using mindfulness in her classroom. And then children who experience anxiety, there's often reduced anxiety with people who practice mindfulness. So, those little guys that are afraid to take a chance, they're not the big risk takers. So if we can help them feel more comfortable and more confident when they're learning, then they'll, hopefully take a chance and try the new word, or do that extra question, or just be confident enough to believe in themselves that they can do it. So although specific to learning, there isn't a ton out there, just from like a mental health and a social emotional perspective, there is a lot of really promising research that shows that children especially can benefit from learning those mindfulness practices early on.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. It's so interesting because this is we're at the leading edge of sort of this new domain where all this research is happening around mindfulness, and it's so new, but it's one of those things that, because you're seeing the benefits, in talking to teachers that are doing this, they're talking about the benefits that they're seeing and the positive outcomes that they're having, that I'm just so excited to see more empirical studies that can really show the evidence of the progress that students are making in their learning, in a way that can convince those that aren't convinced yet.
Right. Yeah. But the good thing about it is that, the more I talk to people, they kind of say, oh, but I'm kind of already doing that already. Right. So it's just building on what they're already doing and kind of taking it that next step.
Yeah. That makes so much sense. So then I'd love to know, in terms of your own practice as a teacher that teaches mindfulness to her students, what sort of outcomes are you seeing? You've been doing this with your students since September, am I right?
Right. Yeah.
So, we're recording this in mid-May. So what sort of transformations or progress have you been noticing that you can attribute to the mindfulness practice that you're doing with your students?
Yeah, it's been the last few weeks that I've really seen a shift. When I first started in September, they would giggle. They're grade 3. So we would all sit together on the floor and we'd all sit crisscross, and I get them to plant their sit bones, and, we'd all take a deep breath together, and then the giggles would start, right? Mm-hmm. But now, as we're doing it, they see me walk in and they just know. They sit at the carpet, they have their hands in their lap, they're sitting up tall, they're ready to take those big belly breaths, and they look forward to that part of the day now. At first, they were really reluctant to close their eyes. And I think that's just part of, the vulnerability of closing your eyes in a room full of people. And now I'll see their little faces, and their eyes are closed and their cheeks are relaxed and their shoulders are down away from their ears, and they're breathing deeply, and they just have this really tranquil, peaceful look on their face. And it's pretty special to see. But it's also having that common language of, or either me suggesting to them, well, why don't we take a few breaths, or what can we do? What strategy can we use for you right now? Or them coming to me and saying, you know what, I really need your help. Can we breathe together? And, it's just something so simple, but so powerful for these students.
Yeah, that's so great to hear. And that brings us back to what you were saying in the beginning about, something has to be practiced over and over and over before the brain literally changes to make new pathways for this new learned behavior. What we're really doing is we're teaching a set of steps that the child's brain goes through to choose the behavior that they want to take or to make based on what's going on in their life. So the fact that now they have done this enough to be able to vocalize to you, hey, things aren't going well. Can we take some deep breaths together? Or, you being able to suggest what strategy can we use, and them knowing that they have something in their toolkit to use. We're teaching them a behavior.
And what I love about it is that it is so empowering because they are doing it themselves. Like, they're training their own brain. They are rewiring their neurocircuitry. They're shaping their thoughts and their actions. And they're allowing themselves just to sort of be in the moment when they need to. And that's something that as adults that we need to do for ourselves too, right? Like, we just have to kind of let ourselves be content in the moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the one thing I love about mindfulness is how empowering it is, because you're teaching yourself. You're helping yourself make the connections and rewiring your brain essentially to make those choices, moment to moment and day to day as you need them.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So to close off, I'd just love to know, is there anything that you'd love to share with our audience that really stood out to you, either in your research around mindfulness in education and how it supports learners, or just from what you've seen in your practice of mindfulness with your students?
Yeah, I guess a couple of things really stood out with the studies, and one of them is how you have to use it or lose it, basically. So if you only do it a couple times and then you say, "Oh, that's not working for me," well, yeah, because you haven't really developed those strong connections. But the more you stick with it, the stronger the results will be for you and your class. And the other thing that really stood out for me was how important it is for the brain to be ready to learn. And I guess in a way I sort of dismissed that as a teacher. Like, I didn't realize the impact that a recess issue could have on kids. And, they come in and I thought we dealt with this issue and now it's time to do math. Well, their brains just aren't ready yet. They're not ready yet to take on that new learning because they're still trying to figure out what happened with their friend at recess.
Yes.
So it's really it's validating the whole child and helping them be ready so that we can all move on with academics. So it's an important tool.
Yeah. I think as adults, we often, when those kids are coming in with the problems and in our mind, we're saying, we really have to get to the academics. Like, can we just deal with this later? But in their mind, they've had a very short life. And that thing that happened at recess, that to us as adults with much more experience but much better able to see the big picture and go, that's not really that big of a deal, right? But for them, it is a big deal. And they're feeling big emotions just like us adults would for something really severe that would happen in our lives, And so their body is pumped full of these stress hormones that, like you said, when the amygdala is going crazy, it's pumping all these stress hormones into the body and their brain is offline. It's not ready to learn. And so we often think of these things as disruptions. But really, if we aren't addressing it and, doing that mindful moment to come back to calm before we move forward, then the teaching isn't going anywhere, right? So,
No, exactly.
it's like
really,
they might be
it
sitting
can't
in their
happen.
seat. They might be sitting in their seat, but really you're talking to a wall, unless you're
Yeah, yeah.
getting their brain turned on first. So, yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
And, it's just as important as it is for our students to learn. I think it's important for us as adults too, right? Like if we're thinking about what's for dinner and, my kids have all these 3 different things tonight and then I got to go to my mom's and, do all these things, like our minds are spinning too. So if we practice it ourselves, as we're doing it with our students, it really benefits us just as much,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
So it's just as good for the adults as it is for the kids,
Yeah.
for sure.
And the kids can tell when we are present with them and when we're not. And when we're present with them, they tend to be more regulated. When we're more regulated, they're more regulated, right? So if we're off thinking about all the things that are stressing us out and we're feeling stressed out, that's energetically our students can see that we're stressed out and that stresses them out. And
Oh yeah. There's I listened to one of your podcasts on energy and the sort of like the energy waves that we emit, right? And part of the reason I got into mindfulness is because I was living in that sort of energy state where it was not a good energy, right? So I was the person who was thinking about what I had to do after work and what was next. And we got to get through this and we got to do this and we got to do that. And I felt my heart racing. And then I could see that my students were kind of following suit. So I started getting into mindfulness because I realized that I needed to live my life, not just experience it and think about what was on the horizon, right? Is just, no, this, what I'm doing right now, this second, is the most important thing.
Yeah.
And planning ahead, of course, especially in teaching, you have to plan ahead. But what we're doing right now, this science lesson on the butterfly life cycle is the most important thing in my life, right?
Yeah.
And we had to convince the kids of it too. So I think if you practice it, then you can really preach it. And if you practice it as an adult, you really, really enjoy the benefits of just being in the moment. Dinner's going to happen no matter what. Like whether I think about 5 different recipes and what's in the fridge or what, it's going to happen when I walk through the door. But what I'm doing right now with my students in the classroom really is the most important thing. And if they feel your energy going towards them and what you're doing, they will become more invested. Mm-hmm. And then you can really get to the learning. So yeah, the kids can see right through all the phoniness, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming back on the show. We really appreciate you and the work that you're doing in the world. You are an amazing ambassador for Educalme, and we appreciate you. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
If you would like to get in touch with Jen, you can find her on Instagram at Teacher Jen K204. You can also email her or check out her website, which has a link to her master's portfolio if you're interested in checking that out. And I will put links to those in our show notes. So you can go to podcast.educalme.com. Educalme is spelled EDUCALME. And then click on episode number 73 and all that information will be there. All right, so your exit ticket today is to try out mindfulness in the classroom. See how it goes for you. Now, as Jen said, this is a practice that really needs to be repeated over and over and over to build those neural pathways, to get your students' brains able to do this practice in a time that they actually need it. So we have a free resource for you that will help you get started with this practice in your classroom. It's our Introduction to Mindfulness. And in Introduction to Mindfulness, you're going to get 5 audios to listen to with your students so that your students and yourself will be guided through a mindfulness practice that is made for the classroom. And you'll also get printables. So we have some reflection materials in there. We have a lesson plan that's going to teach you about some of the vocabulary that we use and explain exactly how to get this practice started in your classroom. And we also have some posters that are going to help to visually represent what your students are learning during this mindfulness practice. So this introduction to mindfulness will last you at least a month, so 4 or 5 weeks long. You'll be able to use this. And you can find it by going to educalme.com/intro. So again, go to www.educalme.com/intro, and Educalme is spelled EDUCALME to get that introduction to mindfulness for free. And for those of you that teach in French, when you enroll in Introduction to Mindfulness, you get access to the English version and the French version. So both languages there for you for whichever language you want to use. All right, we want to thank you so much for spending your time with us here today. We appreciate you and the work you're doing in the world, and we are so excited to be a part of your journey and here to support you along the way. Be sure to tune back in next week where we're going to be talking about how to improve classroom behavior. All right, have a wonderful week.